In the mid-1980s, He-Man and She-Ra, the stars of the Masters of the Universe and Princess of Power brand, were on a non-stop tour to the top, until they weren't. After Masters of the Universe crashed in 1987, it was relaunched as New Adventures of He-Man in Space! Yes, He-Man left Eternia and was off to outer space, destined to be the next huge part of the franchise. Well, New Adventures wasn't the next huge part, and it came down even faster than the original land. Well, He-Man was still out there. He was still out in outer space. The brand ended. Suddenly, fans following the story said, well, wait a minute. You're just going to leave him there? This is the story of how he got him back. So obviously Masters of the Universe has recognizable characters, heroes, villains, vehicles. I know I'm describing a toy line, right? It's almost like the cartoon show and the toy line were one and the same. Well, besides the amazing characters, there was also the location. And the planet Eternia is pretty much just as sync with He-Man as Battle Cat or a chest harness or fuzzy shorts. All these things are just He-Man, and Eternia, named by Donald Glut in the original mini-comics, trying to come up with a name that meant a play environment that could do anything, and that really was a perfect description. Eternia had ancient ruins, mysterious castles, jungles, deserts. Snake Mountains is. So, no, well, one Snake Mountain. So, well, it had 3 heads, and is there a plural for Snake Mountain? Snake Mountains? Snake Mountain? Snake Mountain. Let's go with that. All right, and there's a royal palace. Only one of those. All right, well, the point is, Eternia had everything where a kid could want to play. Occasionally, He-Man might go to other places like Trala, which was a magical world in a different dimension. For those keeping track at home, Trala is the home world of the little floating Orko guy that was his He-Man's sidekick in the Filmation series. Trallans. And then, of course, there was She-Ra's home planet of Etheria, which was set in a different dimension as well, but was another environment that He-Man occasionally would go to. Maybe to have horseback rides with his sister through the country for funsies. Well, Eternia was even done as a playset in the toy line. The largest playset that Mattel ever made for Masters of the Universe. Well, I wonder how that compares actually to the Super 7 Snake Mountain. Well, either way, Eternia was no more with New Adventures. The cast was gone, the location was gone, everything was different. And it left a lot of kids in the 80s who were picking up this new line wondering, well, wait a minute, that doesn't really feel like He-Man. He-Man's not in outer space. He-Man, lives at the mall, and I'd go visit him in his castle, and, he dresses a certain way, and this is what I imitate, because when children imitate a character on Halloween, it's one of the best ways of showing, honestly, affection for that character. It's called billboarding, if you will. It's done on t-shirts and lunchboxes, but it really climaxes on Halloween if you want to talk to children about what characters are aspirational to them. The kid wants to be Snoopy? All right. Well, with He-Man sales down after the original line sort of crashed in 1987 for a variety of reasons, a lot of folks obviously wanted to throw in the towel and say, well, okay, obviously Masters of the Universe has had its time and it's time to move on and let's create new things like, oh, what if we had like food that attacked each other? Well, there was going to be a return to He-Man, but it wouldn't be a return that would involve Eternia, but again, the return would be outer space. The idea was to update He-Man and find ways of giving him a new spin, a new theme. So, hey, why not take a barbarian and shoot him into outer space? Hey, it works. It totally sounds toyetic. I mean, on a concept board, yeah. Barbarian in space, very, John Carter, and, that's very much the origins of He-Man and the pulps and all that kind of stuff. So, seems like a great new way to go. Everyone got a redesign. Skeletor, the familiar look we're used to from Filmation. Well, for New Adventures, he was going to be made more spacey, and he was going to get new spacey villains to hang out with him, and they were going to look very different from Beastman and Evil-Lyn, be more sci-fi, picking up on, some of that trend hitting with, well, Star Wars, which is what the brand was originally battled to put it up against. He-Man would also go through a transformation, but not from Prince Adam to a muscular man, but to a slightly less muscular, ponytailed, wielding sword. They both got new looks and new casts, and honestly, these looks have gotten very much, sort of pop, or in pop culture, they've got their own niche. There are people that are just huge fans of New Adventures and the redesign. There are others, not so much, but they definitely do have their fans, and we did our best to work them into classics. The original toys, though, were much less muscular, you could say, from the original, and that was a big part of their failure at market. And now with the show not doing well and the toys not catching on, all right, we now had two Masters of the Universe sort of, failures within a 5-year period. The original line bombing and New Adventures not taking off. This time, it was give up. We're not gunning back. We're not, refusing to throw in the towel. We are going to walk away from Masters of the Universe and stop losing money on it. But from a story perspective, this left He-Man literally floating in outer space. This is where the story ended. New Adventures was a continuation of Filmation. It was both in the show and in the mini-comics that came with it, so it was clearly, Filmation, what happened next. And he was just left. The story never concluded. And fans were asking, okay, well, what happens now? Is he going to return to Eternia? And yes, there was a lot of, there was both, speculation, and there was even fan fiction or fan tribute art, I want to call it. Emiliano, who is a huge, huge He-Man fan and a professional toy artist, did a unofficial, unlicensed comic called Homecoming. I've actually never read it or seen it because it's not an official comic, but I know it's floating out there because I've been part of the He-Man community. I did find some art online. I hope it was okay to post this. It was all over the place when I hit Google, so anyway, it was a fan story of how He-Man could come home from outer space. Now, when we did Masters of the Universe Classics, we did want to storytell as much as we could, and the idea was to continue the 2000X storyline because, well, I was a huge fan of that. We wanted it to keep going. It also left off, right in the middle, much as New Adventures did back in the day. And that was a big part of using the or the bios, because unlike the vintage line, which had mini-comics, which were a huge, underrated part of the line, and for those who collected it or owned it as children, reading these mini-comics, especially pre-Filmation, they're really underrated. And although that's because some of the ones in the middle were pretty hokey. Well, we finally were able to do mini-comics in Motu Classics for the 30th anniversary through a sort of a donation we got of non-media money from management to help celebrate the anniversary. We figured out in concurring years that we could use the entire non-media budget to produce one mini-comic. So that's how we did 3 in the first year, and then the following years we would do 1, because we're like, oh, well, we can afford that. But we did have to show how the mini-comic could be used for non-media or to promote the brand, and to do this we showed how it would bring together different aspects of the story. Like here we have the New Adventures spaceship showing up at the end of the 2000X storyline after the final battle in the first 3 mini-comics from that 30th anniversary year, and picking up He-Man and She-Ra to go off on some new adventures. They even make a joke about it in the dialogue. So I realized, though, wait a minute, we're now at the exact same position that we were trying to solve. We've now shown how 2000X could resolve to new adventures, but we also left He-Man there. By the way, if you want to read those first 3 mini-comics, they are in the Dark Horse coffee table book. So people have been asking me that in the comments, so I thought I would throw that in there. Okay, so where am I going with all of this? And are we ever going to get there? Probably, but hang on, because, it's all important background information we're building here. So the next mini-comics we did, since we can now do 1 per year, we had to sort of make it count. And the 4th one, we did the origin of Skeletor. It seemed like that was a very monumental thing to do, and if we had 1 mini-comic, that was a story to tell. Well, Then, as we realized we could do this each year, we launched a 3-part saga that was going to be tied into a much bigger project called The Fall of Eternia, which never happened. I'll link to that at the end of this video if you want to see what happened with that project. But we were able to use these to keep telling the story, and you'll notice we called this mini-comic Homecoming. Very deliberate. I wanted to do that as an homage to what Emiliano did. I knew it was a huge thing with the fan community, and I was hoping they'd recognize that as an homage of saying, hey, I know that wasn't a licensed comic or official, but I know fans really loved it. So we wanted to pay homage to that. All right, so with the next few mini-comics, a big part of them that often gets overlooked is the opening paragraph, which is extremely important because it really, well, it sums up what, like an entire season of 2000X. So if 2000X had gone into New Adventures, this description here, A New Era Begins, this was basically summing up the entire season of what would have been a 2000X version of New Adventures and what would have happened. So a lot happens in these paragraphs, and they're definitely worth checking out if you have those mini comics. They're some of the most important parts of the lore, tying things together. And since they, some people just flip right to the comic and bypass the part where we're actually setting things up. All right, so jumping into the finale of what would have been the 2000X New Adventures adaptation, we see He-Man and She-Ra and Icarius, aka Flipshot, approaching Horde World for the final battle. And if you're saying, well, wait a minute, I don't remember She-Ra being part of the New Adventures line, whether you had the New Adventures line or the Princess of Power line, they definitely didn't make this She-Ra back in the day. So what the what? Well, what you're looking at here is an amazing fan creation, but what we did at Mattel, and well, we reached out to the Four Horsemen to have them design New Adventure She-Ra so we could put her into the mini-comic deliberately so that we could seed the idea of doing her as a toy. As I mentioned earlier, we were using non-media budget for this. So we could go to management and say, see how we seeded this character in the mini-comic, and then she became a toy, and then we sold that toy, and we made money? So that's how we were able to use the non-media money to do the mini-comics. That was the direct sort of corporate connection, if you will, of how we could justify doing that. You have to justify everything. All right, so back to the story. So in addition to He-Man and She-Ra, you'll see that New Adventure Skeletor with the floating head of one of his minions in a jar there to show passage of time, much like Icarius getting a eye patch. That's the visual media icon symbol for time has passed. Give somebody a scar or an eye patch or put their head in a jar. So they approach Horde World, and He-Man, She-Ra, and Skeletor all team up to take down Horde Prime once and for all. Because remember, Horde Prime is the head of the Horde Empire. And I do love this caption and this dialogue, probably one of my favorites in the entire mini-comic, for the obvious reason. It's over, Prime. Yes, no, obviously that was deliberate. People were like, wow, do you realize you were quoting Transformers? Yeah. Yes, I do. I was also a child of the 80s. So yes, there he is, Horde Prime, standing on his giant mechanical device that's going to destroy everything. And we get to see the very beginning of what would have been a final battle between New Adventure She-Ra and Horde Prime to pay off her entire storyline. And then we cut away to a whole adventure with He-Man and Skeletor. It is his comic, after all. So we leave him off at the end of this one with him essentially saying, all right, New Adventures are over. We've defeated Horde Prime, and it's time to go home. And that brings us into that Homecoming mini-comic that I was just talking about like several minutes ago. And once again, we used the dialogue box or the summary box on the inside cover to sum up an entire season of what would have been 2000X of the time period between He-Man wanting to come home and actually doing that he spent 10 years searching for his sister because she becomes lost in that final battle. And so this would have been a whole other season. So again, using these to really map out huge amounts of continuity tying things together. And then here we are, Homecoming. Now you'll notice in this panel, very deliberately, it is a recreation of a panel you've seen before. In fact, you saw it in the previous mini-comic. Instead of He-Man and Icarius heading towards Eternia, you had He-Man, Icarius, and New Adventures She-Ra heading towards Horde World. So this is something I stole completely from Erik Larsen, who does it very, very successful, and he talks about doing it as a way of jogging the memory, creating something familiar yet different. You'll notice how She-Ra is missing from the shot. It's to emphasize that she's gone, that she's disappeared, because this mini-comic is going to tell the story of where she's been. So then, again, we have the same exact panel layout of the previous one, and Icarius heading into Eterno City. And that's how we got him home. That's how we used the mini-comics to get He-Man out of outer space and back to Eternia, where his story needed to continue. It was something the fans for years had talked about. As I said, there were fan creations, fan art made for this, but it was really great to do it officially and show how He-Man could go to new adventures and come back and return to the planet that is associated with him and he loves. I hope you enjoyed this look at He-Man history and how we tried to rectify some of the story continuity and loose ends from the 80s in the new Classics line. If you enjoyed this video, please share it with others. Check out more on this channel and comment in the section. I always comment back. Thanks for watching.